If you ask a white person, do they want to switch roles with a black person? They don't want to do that. They know they don't want to do that. There's an episode from Little House in the Prairie, the 70s TV show, where the young black kid, played by Todd Bridges, asked the white guy, who's the father of the house, would you want to switch roles and be me?
Mm.
Would you want to be black? The white guy doesn't answer the question because clearly everybody in America who's white knows that they're privileged. They just don't want to admit that they're privileged because once they do, they have to take account and responsibility for what that means, which they refuse to do.
No matter where you come from or what challenges you face, remember that you have the power to transform your life. We're bringing you the most inspiring stories and voices from authors who are indeed powerful forces for the culture in their work. These interviews will keep you believing in yourself, inspire you to keep pushing forward, and most importantly, never ever stop dreaming. It's your boy Kolby, and this is the Kolby Kulture Show. Welcome back to the Kolby Kulture Show, where we sit with authors, voices in culture, and thinkers shaping the conversations that define our times. I'm your boy, Derek Jacoby Washington, but around here, you know me as Kolby. Listen, today's guest is someone whose life and work have been woven into multiple threads of American cultural and political life. From the White House to national media, from classrooms to activism spaces, and from the New York Times bestseller list to deep cultural commentary. Keith Boykin is a national political commentator, TV and film producer, author, and former White House aide to President Bill Clinton. He's a New York Times bestselling author whose books wrestle with race, identity, and power in America. He helped organize the first meeting between an acting U.S. president and LGBTQ leaders, co-founded the National Black Justice Coalition, and has appeared across the media from BET to CNN. His most recent book, Why Does Everything Have to Be About Race? 25 Arguments That Won't Go Away, came out in 2024. And it isn't just a book about race. It's a conversation about why the questions Americans refuse to let go actually still matter. Keith, welcome to the Kolby Kulture Show, brother. How's it going?
It's going well, Derek. How you doing?
I'm great. So I want to start by going way back. You grew up in St. Louis, lived in Florida, went to Harvard Law School, not exactly the path that most people take to the places that you've been. What stories from your early life stick with you most? And I'm talking about the experiences that taught you how to navigate identity, ambition, and community well before you had a national platform.
Good question. With my mom right now in Texas, and when I was young, my mom used to always give me some advice. She would say, "Don't let anybody tell you what to do." And
Hmm.
I think that advice kind of guided me in terms of not being forced to follow a traditional path. And so I've done all kinds of things. I haven't had a traditional career path. I haven't had a regular job in 25 years.
Hmm.
It's longer than that, actually. And I've just been motivated from that time, from the words of my mom, to just sort of go my own way,
Yeah.
try to follow my own path.
Yeah, love that. And I read that at Harvard, you were editor of the Civil Rights, Civil Liberties Law Review, and that your early activism was already taking shape there. How much did that moment, that time, feel like it was preparing you for the work that you go on to do?
Well, I actually feel like I started thinking about the work that I'm doing now. I feel like I started when I was in probably high school,
Wow.
probably even before that. Because I remember when I was a kid, I remember reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, and that had a real big impact on me. I remember seeing Roots when I was a kid. That had a big impact on me. And I remember seeing a TV series called Jesus of Nazareth, which had
Hmm.
an impact on me because I was like, wait a minute, who is this Jesus guy? Why is he not like all these other people who call themselves Christian? It didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So, a lot of different influences kind of shaped who I am, the political influences, religious influences, and the Black cultural influences. And by the time I was in high school, I was working in politics. My first political campaign was back in 1982 when I was
Wow.
a high school student. No, I was a high school student in Clearwater, Florida, working for a liberal Democratic congressional candidate. So by the time I got to law school, in 1989, I was already deep involved in politics. I'd worked for several political campaigns, presidential campaigns. Working for the Civil Rights, Civil Liberties Law Review was just kind of an extension of that for me at Harvard. And I was also a leader in the movement for faculty diversity. So we were holding protests and suing our own law school
Mm.
for lack of diversity. We had Barack Obama, who was one of my classmates, or actually a year ahead of me, spoke at one of our rallies. Jesse Jackson came to one of our rallies. Derek Bell, who was the founder of the critical race theory movement, was one of our mentors in that whole movement. So I feel like that whole time period in the 80s kind of created this whole sense of identity for me, political identity, about standing up against forces that tell you that you can't do it. The time when
Yeah.
AIDS was killing my peers and the president wasn't saying anything about it, do anything about it.
Yeah, and you left the legal track to work on political campaigns and then serve in the White House during the Clinton administration. That's a leap a lot of people don't make lightly. What made you say I want to be in the room where decisions are made, even if it meant walking away from a traditional legal path?
In the room where it happened, as they say in Hamilton, right? I feel like what happened with me is I never wanted to be a lawyer in the first place, so it wasn't really a
Mhm.
big step. When I applied to law school, I only applied to two law schools. I applied to Washington University Law School in St. Louis because it's where I'm from, and they offered me a full scholarship. And I applied to Harvard. And once I got in Harvard, I was like, well, I don't really have to be a lawyer. I just want to get the Harvard degree. So I got the degree. And as soon as I graduated, I moved to San Francisco to work for a law firm, but I got a call from the Clinton Gore campaign. Bill Clinton's campaign was asking if I wanted to go work for them. And they knew me from previous work in other campaigns. And I said,
Mhm.
yeah, hell yeah. So I quit my job. Well, actually, I took a leave of absence because I didn't want to give up in case he lost. I quit
Yeah.
my job and moved across the country, drove my car to Little Rock, Arkansas, and started working for him. And once he won, it was off to the races. I was totally surprised about that because I had worked for I think 1982, I worked for a candidate who lost. 1984, I worked for a candidate who lost. 1986, I worked for a candidate who lost. 1988, I worked for a candidate who lost. 1989. So five different candidates who lost before I worked for Bill Clinton, and he won, and it was off to the White House from there.
Yeah, yeah, and you helped arrange the first meeting between a U.S. president and LGBTQ leaders. That's history. What was the weight of that moment like for you to really know that you were opening a door that hadn't been opened
Well, when you're making history, you don't really feel like you're making history. You just feel like you're
before?
doing what you're supposed to be doing. And I was naive. I came out, as they say, or invited in is the new terminology, back in 1990, in April of 1990. Or was it 1991? I can't believe I actually forgot. I was 91. I've known this all my life, and now suddenly I've forgotten. So it was April of 1991. And it was shortly after that I graduated from law school in 92 and started working for the campaign. And then by January of 1993, I found myself as the highest ranking openly gay person in the Clinton White House. Less than
Wow.
2 years after I came out. So it was a big transition for me. But at the same time, I was surrounded by people who were openly gay at Harvard, peers and friends who were just doing their thing. It was the beginning of a new time, a new era. It didn't strike me as a big deal. I didn't know
Yeah,
that was something that was unusual. And Bill Clinton, to his credit, when he ran and while he was president, said that that was not an issue for him, and he tried to be supportive of LGBTQ people, although he didn't follow through on his promise to lift the ban on gays in the military. That was a debacle. But kind of changed the climate, so didn't feel like it was an issue. I mean, why should it be a controversy for a president of the United States to meet with his own constituents,
yeah.
regardless of whether they're LGBTQ or not? It just happened to be the first time that ever happened. So, like I said, don't really think about the significance of it when you're doing it. You just think, okay, we got to do this. Why wouldn't we do this?
Mhm.
But in context, I guess I should have. I remember when I first got hired for that job in the White House, I had to do an FBI interview, and the FBI agent, just a regular interview, no controversy. The FBI agent didn't say anything, and I figured I'd get my security clearance. But then they called me back a couple of weeks later and said, we actually need to do a follow-up interview with you. And I came in for the follow-up, and they said, we have reason to believe that you might be leading an alternative lifestyle. I'm like, alternative lifestyle. Like, I'm gay. If that's what you're at.
Right,
So, like, how you're the FBI? You don't know that? Like, how is that?
right.
How is that something a big secret? But we were at the beginning of the leading edge of a new time when one's sexual orientation was no longer a disqualifying factor for public service in politics. Prior to that time, it had been. So we were just right at that cusp period where things were changing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so let's shift now and talk a little bit about your newest book. Why does everything have to be about race? 25 arguments that won't go away. The title alone is already a cultural flashpoint. It's almost provocative. But when you peel back the layers, the book isn't really about complaining about race discourse. It's about why those questions are still with us. And so, what made you want to address these arguments that won't go away at this moment in history?
Yeah, in hindsight, I kind of wonder if I should change the title of the book because a lot of people have mistakenly, a lot of white conservatives have mistakenly assumed that the book is saying that from a non-critical point of view. The question of the book at the title is, why does everything have to be about race? Which is a
Hmm.
question that every black person has heard a white person say at some point. And I'm
Hmm.
not saying that in an approving way, I'm saying it in a mocking way. But I'm not sure
Hmm.
everybody got the subtlety of that because a lot of white people, every time it used to be when I was on Twitter, every time I post something about racism in America, they would say, and this is the guy who wrote, why does everything have to be about race? And like, if you read the book, you would know that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
The whole point of the book is that everything is about race because white people made it that way. It's not
Mhm.
because black people chose to. When white people ask that question, it's a reflection of their own ignorance of their own history. The fact that they created this country that they stole from the land they stole from the indigenous people, and they forced black people to build it for them, and then created a whole infrastructure around that racism. And then after it was dismantled because of our hard work and effort through abolitionists and civil rights activists, they try to pretend like, oh, well, we didn't know anything about it. And why do we have to
Yeah.
talk about race? As if the weight of hundreds of years of slavery and segregation and racism and mass incarceration and bigotry and bias doesn't still impact us today.
Mhm. And as someone who's walked those conversations in media and law, politics, and activism, do you think the reason these arguments persist is because we haven't fully answered them or because we keep avoiding the real answers?
I think at some level, people do know the answers.
Mm,
White and black people know the answers. I mean, if you ask a white person, do they want to switch roles with a black person? They don't want to do that. They know they don't want to do that. There's a
right.
episode from Little House in the Prairie back in the 1970s TV show where the young black kid played by Todd Bridges asked the white guy who's the father of the house, would you want to switch roles and be me? Would you want to
Mm,
would you want to be black? The white guy doesn't answer the question because clearly everybody in America is white knows that they're privileged. They just don't want to
mm,
admit that they're privileged because once they do, they have to take account and responsibility for what that means, which they
yeah.
refuse to do. So I think that there is a tendency to sort of try to sweep these things under the rug. And with Trump, he's being very overt about the fact that he's very racist and they want that, but they can still pretend that they're not for some reason because Trump can say something like, well, I have a black friend, and people believe that. Those are the arguments I wanted to dismantle in the book. Things like having a black friend means that you're not racist, or slavery was over hundreds of years ago, so that means that we've moved on, or that America is a post-racial society because they elected one black guy, Barack Obama. Like all
Mm,
those lies that we hear, the gaslighting that we hear from white people over and over again. I wanted to give ammunition for black people to be able to respond to that and to just dismiss it and not have to spend time having to research it because it's all here in one place. I
yeah.
started the book with a quote from Toni Morrison that illustrates the point. She said that the function of racism, the very serious function of racism, is distraction. And
Mm,
once you understand that, you understand that all these questions we spend our time trying to prove, oh, well, we're just as smart, we deserve this job, and all that. It's all a distraction to keep us running, keep us moving, so that they don't have to deal with their own issues in terms of restructuring society to be more equitable.
yeah. Yeah. And you're one of the rare voices who's articulated intersections, not just race and politics, but race and sexuality, queer identity, and Black identity. And you did it early in books like One More River to Cross or Beyond the Download. Today, do you see that conversation shifting in the ways you hoped, or are we still having the same arguments from different angles?
Well, I don't think I'm one of the rare or few voices who are saying that. I feel like back in the day when I started in the 90s, there I might have been, but today I feel like everybody knows, well, not
Yeah.
everybody. It seems like everybody in my peer group, every time I open up Instagram or Substack, I think the people who I'm following, they understand those issues and are talking about them far more eloquently and articulately than I ever could. But I think what has happened is that the discussion about those issues has pushed other people away, has forced white people in particular to be very upset about it. And so they want us to just not talk about these things. They want
Mm,
us to pretend like everything is okay. And Barack Obama was the great salve to sort of prove that. But the majority of white people didn't vote for Barack Obama. And so they
mhm,
don't get to use that as an excuse for why, oh, well, everything is forgiven. We moved on. One black person, even if they had voted for Barack Obama as the majority of white people, one black person doesn't absolve 400, 500 years of oppression.
yeah.
And that's very important that people understand that. So I don't think the conversation has progressed anywhere near as far as it needs to. Among black and brown communities, yeah, we get it. We're talking about intersectionality and we're preaching this message. And there are some white anti-racists out there who are doing the same. But I
Mhm.
honestly think if the poll numbers and the election numbers are accurate based on what we see year after year, the majority of white people don't get it and don't want to get it.
Yeah, and when you sit back and look at the cultural landscape today, from social media to news cycles to even the political weaponization of race, what part of the conversation do you think Americans are still not ready to face?
I don't think Americans are ready to face the conversation that deals with accountability. Like I
Mm,
said, I think there is a subtle, implicit, if not unspoken acknowledgement that, yes, there is racism in America and black people are oppressed. I don't think any white person honestly could tell you otherwise. Most of
okay.
them will, but I think if you really could dig deep down into their knowledge bank and their souls and their minds, they know that. They know that's a lie. And so I think the issue is how do we address what do we do about it? And
Mm,
that's where they don't want to deal with it because they're afraid of accountability. They're afraid that means they have to give up something in order to more equitable society. They're afraid they might have to give up some privilege in order to create that society, which is the reason why the conversation about reparations is so threatening to so many white people. Oh no, we can't have reparations because who's going to pay for it? How are you going to do it? We can come up with $85 billion off the fly to lock up immigrant kids in detention camps with no questions asked. But we can't even contemplate the question of how do we compensate and atone for the fact that this country systematically denied rights to people of color, people who were black, like me, for hundreds of years. And the
mhm,
Fifth Amendment to the Constitution, it says very clearly that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law or
mhm.
just compensation. That's important. Like, you can't take somebody's property and then not compensate them. So
Yeah.
what happened is after they abolished slavery in the District of Columbia during the Civil War in 1862, they actually paid reparations to white enslavers. The US federal government paid reparations to white enslavers in
Uh,
1862 because they were taking their property and they needed to be compensated according to the
okay.
Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. Well, if anybody's property has been taken, it's the property of black people who worked for free for hundreds of years, and we
Yeah.
still haven't been justly compensated for that. So, constitutionally, we are deserving of reparations as a people. And they say, oh, well, we don't know who to give it to because that was hundreds of years ago. Yeah, but somehow you can still talk about the Confederate flag as
Yeah.
though that's relevant and we should all celebrate that and pretend like it's not the symbol of racism that it is. But when it comes to talking about the impact of what that Confederacy stood for and how the perpetuation of white supremacy and slavery and segregation has an impact on us today, they don't want to talk about that. So we
Mhm.
have to peel off the layers of racism and bigotry and hypocrisy if we want to make any progress on that. But I don't have any hope that they will. It's not in their interest to do so.
Yeah.
I don't think they will until we force them to do it. Frederick Douglass says power concedes nothing without a struggle. So people
Mm,
think over time things are going to get better. It ain't going to get better. Barack Obama didn't make them happier. It made them mad. It made them want to go to Donald Trump. So don't think the time itself will erase all the problems.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of times race conversations get distilled into hashtags, into sound bites of these type of viral moments. But you've lived it from an array of spaces, policy rooms to TV panels. What do you think the real conversation about race looks like? I'm talking about the stuff that actually builds some semblance of understanding.
I think it's a conversation for white people to have.
Mm,
A lot of times when I speak, particularly if I go to a white college campus and speak, I do hear a lot of messages. I don't know if it's signifying or sincerity from white allies or people who identify as allies. And a lot of times they ask what they can do to be supportive. And I often respond that I don't need you here at a Black History Month event. You can come if you want, but that's not the work I need you to do. I
yeah.
don't need you to do anything in the Black community. What I need you to do is to go talk to your white cousins and uncles and aunts and grandparents and parents and brothers and sisters and children who are spewing this racism. Have
Yeah.
those difficult conversations with them. I hear every year at Thanksgiving, white people for the past 10 years have been saying, "Oh, I don't want to go back home because I want to talk about Trump and my grandparents and my uncles and all." You know what? I've never had that conversation. I don't know if it was just me because I'm a Black person, but never had that problem. Nobody in my family supports Donald Trump. I'm sure
Right.
there might be some distant cousin somewhere who's related to Clarence Thomas who does, but I don't support him, and nobody else I know who's Black does. And so I think it's a conversation that white people need to have. And it's not just about Donald Trump, it's about racism in general, about the
Yeah.
inability of white America to accept the fact that their privilege not only hurts Black people and hurts America as a whole, but also hurts them. That was the
Mhm.
message that Toni Morrison and James Baldwin tried to communicate in their writings. That racism doesn't just stigmatize the oppressed; it also stigmatizes the oppressor.
Yeah. Yeah. And for the folks who feel exhausted by the talk, like they want to just focus on equality or unity without the race prefix, what would you tell them? And is that a reasonable aim or is it a distraction?
Well, I remember there's a famous quote from Morgan Freeman, who is often used by a quote that's often used by conservatives and Republicans to justify why they don't think we should talk about race. And Morgan Freeman once said, and I'm not quoting him directly, something to the effect of, uh, the way to stop talking about race is to stop talking about race,
Mm,
or the way to end race, or the way to end racism is to stop being racist. Something very simplistic like that. So, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? No, it
mhm.
doesn't make any sense. Not talking about something doesn't eliminate the problem. It
Yeah.
just freezes the status quo. It's like saying, oh, the way to end sexism is just stop talking about sexism. The way to end rape is just stop talking about rape. No, you got to talk about these things if you want to be able to address them. The
Yeah.
problem with this country is that we don't talk about these things. We sweep them under the rug. We had a civil war in this country. 600,000 Americans lost their lives, the bloodiest war in this country, over the issue of slavery. And
Mhm.
immediately after, they spent 12 years trying to rebuild the country, trying to build a better country, called that whole era Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877. And then what? They called it quits and said, okay, we're done with that. We're going to go back to doing exactly what we were doing before. So
Yeah.
they spent 12 years, 12 years, that was it, trying to rebuild the country to help Black people. And then they said, no, we're going to go back to being racist. This country loves to sweep things under the rug, and it's doing it now with the fact that we had an insurrection in this country. The people who lost an election, upset that they lost an election, decided the election, by the way, too, which ushered in the first Black woman into to the White House. They decided, you know what, we're not going to accept this. We're gonna actually have a protest, and we're
Mm,
going to take over the entire federal government. We're going to fight against the United States Capitol Police. And those people went to jail and then got pardoned by the president of the United States. And we're just carrying on as though that's okay. That's not
right.
okay. The Constitution of the United States says that the price for treason, the penalty for treason, is punishable by death.
Mm,
People are walking free as the personal army of the president of the United States. What does that say about the lie, the hypocrisy, the stupidity of the United States Constitution and our government, that we allow that to happen? And for the American people to allow that to happen, it says that our country is a joke built on
mm.
a lie that must be changed, or we will never be able to make any sort of progress.
Yeah. And I ask every guest one last question. So if you could give every listener one sentence to carry with them about race, identity or our shared future, just one concept that matters more than any other concept right now, what would that sentence be?
Well, there's so many that come to mind, but the one I would use is a quotation from one of my heroes, Audre Lorde. Audre Lorde is a Black writer, feminist, cancer survivor, lesbian, and poet. And she once said, "When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid."
Mm,
Reason why I choose that is because if we want to change the structures in America, you're going to have to get beyond our fears and have those difficult conversations and take those difficult actions. And the second reason why I say it is because she doesn't say you won't be afraid if you do that. She says it becomes less and less important whether you are afraid when you're acting in service of your vision. So yeah, you got to be afraid sometimes to do things. Sometimes people ask me, "Are you afraid when you go on TV or give a speech?" Yeah, I get nervous all the time because I never know what's going to happen. But at the same time, fear is not an impediment to cannot be an impediment to progress. The true definition of courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. So be
yeah,
courageous, everyone, and fight back, resist in every way you can that works for you and that's sincere and genuine. And don't let fear stop you.
so good. So good. Keith Boykin, thank you for this, for your clarity, your courage, your thoughtfulness, and your leadership. This conversation wasn't just about a book, it was about why we still live the work of race in America. Can you tell the people how we can stay updated on all that's happening?
Good question. Well, I'm on social media at Keith Boykin, KeithBoykin, all across the various platforms. Also have a website, keithboykin.com. And I'm on CNN every month, usually on Abby Phillips' show, CNN Newsnight. So catch me any one of those places.
Awesome. Family, go check out Keith's work, his books, his commentary, his thoughtful unpacking of the conversations that refuse to go away. This is the Kolby Kulture Show. I'm Kolby, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow the show wherever you listen to your podcast. Watch, like, and subscribe on YouTube. And please feel free to give us a 5-star rating. See you on the next one.